This morning, I want to share with you about the possibility before us, the imperative before us to open our hearts and our minds to the infinite. That, of course, is one way in our tradition of Kriya Yoga. We begin our meditation practice by stating and intending that we open our heart, our essence of being, and our mind to the infinite. And this is a practice of divine remembrance. It's a practice of expanding our consciousness, and something that we can and must do now as a regular practice beyond our meditation. Last week, I was at the satsang speaking with you about ways to find stability in a time of great stress and instability. And of course, the spiritual teachings on finding stability have to do with finding and realizing and standing upon that which does not change. Conditions are constantly changing. When we try to anchor our security and our happiness in that, we're tossed about by the waves of change. So we have to find that which is unchanging, which of course is spirit, which is supreme consciousness, which is the truth of our being. So we need to recognize that through our discernment and realize it through our direct experience. So that becomes our anchor, realizing what we are as expressions of ultimate reality. Knowing that truth gives us foundation to stand upon. Knowing this truth also helps us understand that divine potentials, the potentials of God, indwell us at the soul level of our being. And that one of the aspects of realizing that truth of our being is to draw upon those divine capacities and to bring them forth. So it's not just, intellectually understanding, it's even not just directly experiencing, but it is actualizing those potentials. So today I want to talk about how to do that, how to bring forth our divine capacities at this time. I want to thank Mukti Devi and Chris for the music that they were bringing starting out today. And also, just a point that it was beautiful to hear them singing, chanting Gayatri Mantra. And the meaning of that mantra, let us meditate upon that supreme light of divine truth, divine consciousness, and let that inspire our thoughts and our deeds. So let us meditate upon that higher truth and allow that higher truth to then inspire our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. So we really start right where we are. We have to pull ourselves back from futurizing, from catastrophizing in our minds and come into the holy presence, like the Old Testament story, to take the shoes off your feet. The place where you stand is holy ground. So the place where we stand right now and right where we are is, of course, our practice ground. It's a beautiful saying by the Zen master Dogen, who said, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs. When you find your place where you are, practice occurs. So right now, of course, we naturally feel that our lives are terribly disrupted, because they are. our minds reel, and they're often colored by fear. And we yearn to return to some sense of normalcy, which is understandable because we want the suffering to stop. Suffering in our world, suffering around us, the suffering that we also experience, we want it to stop. And so we have the idea of going back, returning to the way that things were. Yet a paradox of the spiritual way of life is that one of the ways, perhaps the most powerful way to end suffering, is not to run from it. And of course, right now we cannot run from it, which provides a crucible for us for this time. So the paradox of the spiritual life says, rise up and meet it. Meet that suffering with your spiritual heart, with your mind, and transform it. And allow it to transform you and the world. I want to offer a poem by Mark Nepo from his book, The Way Under the Way, beautiful book of poems. As we move deeper into this mysterious river, I pray we don't turn everything we touch into us. As we move deeper into this mysterious river, I pray we don't turn everything we touch into us, that we help each other listen more deeply than we have ever listened. That we help each other listen more deeply than we have ever listened. That we baptize each other with what we find there. That we heal one another's blindnesses by pouring love like water on each other's eyes. And that waking in this way, we make the unseen breath of God visible. The way wind can only lift a tree that has grown in the open. So I want to ask you to consider this. We will not return to the way that things were. Not in our personal lives and not in our collective lives. We will not return to the way that things were. Instead, and now this part requires our gift of imagination and higher vision. Instead, we will have learned to live more deeply, to live from the soul. The soul will rise within us from the background to the foreground. We will live with more awareness of wholeness, of our own body, mind, spirit, of our own global community, of our connection with the earth. We will be more aware of our oneness with all life. We will live with more compassion and love. And we will live more purposefully, recognizing what we care most deeply about, what really matters, what's most important to us. And we will live in such a way that is consistent with that, with what we care about, in such a way that we nurture the soul life of our hearts, our minds, our bodies, and the soul of the world. Now, to accomplish this is going to require our soul powers, and that we not only realize them, but we actualize them. So we begin, as I shared last week, by becoming aware that we have a spiritual foundation to stand upon in this time that is so challenging. And then we begin to actualize our capacity for divine imagination, to use our creative power of imagination. In the teachings of yoga, we understand that we are individualized expressions of one ultimate reality, and that our minds are a portion of universal mind. And that means that there's kind of a give and take, a flow that goes on in the whole universe, in which we can be influenced by what is going on in the collective. We can contribute to the collective. We are all contributing to the collective through our own minds, through our own consciousness. And we can receive inspiration from divine mind, from the higher mind. So our soul power of imagination can be used either to contract, to make smaller our potential, or to expand it. Mind as a vehicle of soul, in a sense, is a middleman or a middlewoman, sits in the middle, between soul and senses, between the inner and the outer life. And through the direction of our attention and awareness, we can either turn outward as our point of reference and identification, through identification with conditions, or inward to abide in the soul and be open to the inspiration of the soul, of what we would call, in a sense, higher mind, higher guidance. Now, this capacity of the soul to be creative, the soul is infinitely creative and infinitely powerful, but sometimes our own capacity to be divinely creative, to bring forth higher potentials, gets hijacked and usurped and carried off by the ego. And then we are imagining the worst, and we are demonstrating our lower drives of fear and selfishness. Thus, the mass reaction to a global pandemic as a first collective response is what? To hoard toilet paper. Sometimes someone will write that what is the craziest thing about human beings? When faced with great fear, they go out and buy as much toilet paper as they can buy. Well, of course, why would we do that? Now, this is a field day for the Freudians, right? Well, in some ways it's true when we look at it. We have to be curious about human nature. Why would we do such a thing? Well, it's related to a security issue, to the first chakra. We want to have control. We want to feel like we're in control. But surely we know that toilet paper is not going to save us. So we have to find, well, where do we find our real sense of security in all of this? And we have to redeem that urge to look for security and bring it back to, how do we find security in the soul? So that was the first step last week. Now, we also have to redeem the soul power of imagination, so that it is not hijacked into fomenting greater fear and suffering, but we bring it forth so that this soul power can allow us to vision and to dream dreams of possibility for this time, and that we can then contribute that to the collective imagination. Now, creative imagination is really a core skill on the spiritual path. It's a place where we begin. We begin by dreaming of enlightenment. We begin by imagining liberation. We generally don't start with knowing it. We start by envisioning it. We hear the teachings of the sages that say that supreme consciousness is what you are, and you can know it, you can realize it, you can live it. But when we first hear it, it is not a reality for us. So we begin simply by imagining what life would be like as an enlightened person. And we begin to move our life in that direction. We begin to arrange conditions. We begin to unleash our divine potentials that are in harmony with living our life as an enlightened being. So this power of imagination is within us, and it is so strong, and it is essential medicine for our time. So every day, I want to encourage you to let loose your power of divine imagination, to let it soar for the higher good. And there are many ways that we bring it forth. You know, we bring it forth, we meditate, we touch that truth of our being, and then we just sit. And, you know, as we did in the meditation this morning, we envisioned light pouring out into the environment. We envisioned our beautiful earth lit up with peace and with healing. This is the power of the imagination. Use it. It is a medicine for all of the messages that we're getting as data points. So we want to use our imagination to lift ourselves, to lift our world. But, you know, contemplation is just one way. There are many other ways that we enter a positive realm of creative imagination. Sing, 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 dance, explore the arts. I know you can't go to a museum right now, but many museums are open online. Arts are the way that this divine imagination expresses itself. So the visual arts, singing, dancing, poetry. I hope you're writing some poems at this time, or you're reading poems. Your dreams are an avenue into your power of soul imagination. Ask questions. Ask yourself important questions. Ask yourself open-ended questions, so the soul power of imagination can rise to respond to these questions. Ask yourself, what do I most want to learn at this time? What do I care most deeply about? How will this time change me? How will it reorder my priorities? And let your mind soar beyond the data-driven world into the divinely inspired world. And then be part of bringing it forth. Allow your mind to soar beyond the data-driven world, which is important, but allow your mind to soar beyond that to the divinely inspired world. Then be part of bringing it forth. I want to close with a favorite story. I have several stories that sort of live in my heart, and this is a story about the Zen teacher Paul Reps, and this particular version is shared by Joel Levy from his book, The Fine Arts of Relation, Concentration, and Meditation, Ancient Skills for Modern Minds. So in this story, the Zen teacher, Paul Reps, of course, was studying Zen and practicing Zen, and he made a trip to the Orient, to Japan, and he was on his way to Korea to meet a Zen master. And of course, all of his resources and his dreams had gone into making this journey. And he gets to Japan, And he goes to the clerk and he shows his passport at the office in Japan. And he is asking for the visa to go to Korea to meet this Zen master. And the clerk then politely refuses his visa because the war has recently broken out in Korea. He was devastated. He was so disappointed. So the story goes that, not knowing what to do with his disappointment or his frustration, he sat down, pulled his thermos out of his pack, unscrewed the top, poured a cup of tea, sat, mindfully sipped the tea, grew quiet. And then he brought out his notebook and he wrote a haiku, a short sentence. He took that haiku back to the clerk at the desk, presented it to him. The clerk read the haiku, took Paul's passport, stamped his visa for Korea, bowed, and waved him on his way. What was that haiku? The haiku said, making tea or drinking a cup of tea, I stopped the war. Drinking a cup of tea, I stopped the war. That is a wild leap of the imagination. And it is the kind of leap that we must make in our everyday life. Drinking tea, I stop the pandemic. Washing the dishes, I stop the pandemic. Doing the laundry, I stop the pandemic. Waving and smiling at my neighbor as we cross the street to create distance between us. Waving and smiling at my neighbor as we cross the street to create distance between us. I stop the pandemic. May we bring forth the power of our imagination in this time and discover how it is that the divine power within us can bring healing and blessing in our lives and in the life of our world. Om. Peace.